Okay, I think we'll get started. Welcome everybody to our first meeting of the Historical Society for this year. We are so excited to be back, and we have a wonderful, wonderful lineup of programs. If you haven't picked a paper off the table, we have a whole list of everything we're going to have for this year. We're starting tonight with immigration in Southeast Pennsylvania. Next month we talk about the Kolb and Culp family who settled here since the 1700s. We have our Memorial Day, annual Memorial Day tribute in the park in May. In June, Lisa Minardi is going to talk to us about the restoration of the Daniel Heister House. In July, we are going to have Old Goshenhoppen Oyster Picnic recollections at the church, at Old Goshenhoppen Church. In September, we're going to do cigar making in this region. October is the history of the Young Fuel Company. And in November, the lost covered bridges of Montgomery County. So we have a wide variety of programs for everyone to enjoy. So if you haven't picked up a paper, do so. You can mark your calendar and know what we're going to be doing. We would like, first of all, to thank Pastor Ed and the congregation of Tabor United Methodist Church for allowing us to use their facility. They're more than accommodating and more than gracious, and we really, really appreciate it. So if you would stand, we'll do a pledge to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. You may remember Ryan. He was here last year and talked to us about the Underground Railroad. Tonight he's going to talk about immigration in Southeast Pennsylvania. And Ryan, it's all yours. Thank
okay.
You. He doesn't need that?
I got the special one.
Oh, wow.
Okay. Well, thanks everybody. My name is Ryan Conroy. I'm president of the Springford Historical Society, and the past year or so we've got to work a couple times closely with Upper Salford Township, and so we built a nice relationship with you guys. And I was here last year. Who was here last year when I did the talk on the Underground Railroad? Okay, does everybody remember the storm? Right? Remember, I was like just about now to start, and then we looked out the window and it looked like Wizard of Oz. Yeah, so thankfully we don't have to worry about that weather today and driving home in that. That was kind of crazy. But of course, last talk I did was about the Underground Railroad, specifically in Montgomery County and how a lot of the Pennsylvania Germans were involved. This is obviously a different subject, but not, we're almost continuing off of some of how the early immigration and stuff in this area was influential. And but today we're going to talk about a couple different or multiple different types of backgrounds that have developed and came here in southeastern Pennsylvania. We're going to try and do that in my short period of time of talking, and it is quite a large history. You could do one talk just on, obviously in this area, specifically on just the German immigration, so, but we're going to cover a whole bunch of different backgrounds, and I think, some of you probably here in the crowd have a mix of different backgrounds, such as myself. That's how I got interested in this subject, so, going through my personal family genealogy got me really interested in the subject, and then I was able to expand upon that into different areas and relate it to other people. So I always like to start my talk with, of course, the first people that were here when a lot of our ancestors were arriving here from Europe. And of course, when the first European settlers that were coming to southeastern Pennsylvania, the first people that they encountered were the Lenape Native Americans that occupied, where we're standing today, all the way down to the Delaware River, farther north, along the Schuylkill River, and as far west as the Susquehanna, and a little farther into South Jersey, kind of an encompassing area of where the Lenape tribe was. When they first arrived, different backgrounds that were coming here from Europe interacted with the Lenape in different ways. Generally, a lot of the English that were coming here, a lot of the English themselves were accustomed to slave trade and owning slaves, and so a lot of the ones that came here had brought that here to the country, but they also interacted differently with the Lenape tribes, and with the purchases of large tracts of lands directly from William Penn. Most of those tracts of lands that were purchased directly from William Penn were usually Quaker related. And so those Quakers were usually generally coming from, of course, we said England, Wales, Northern Ireland. At the time it wasn't Northern Ireland yet, but it was the northern part of Ireland, which is where most of the Irish Quakers were, and a couple different backgrounds of Quakers. And of course, right after that time period, and almost really close, of course, is when the first German families that came here to the United States, the 13 families that came here to Germantown in 1683, as we, of course, refer to them as the Pennsylvania Germans. How many people here are of Pennsylvania German descent? That's what I expected. So, like, that's what this area is. And, but you can always trace back to place names, right? When you do research on immigration, that's one thing that always fascinates me is, like, you'll see the name of a creek or you'll see the name of a road very specifically, or names of townships or boroughs. And usually that name is obviously coming from something very specifically related to early immigration to that area. Of course, being in Salford Township, originally it was just Salford, and then it got separated into Upper and Lower and Salford, so you had the three now, but back then, with being one township, Salford is actually obviously an English word. It comes from Salford, England, and they were early Quakers, but it wasn't too long after that that obviously this area was dominated by people of German descent and Pennsylvania Germans, and of course a lot of Mennonites, and Goshahoppen, of course, around this area a lot, and bordering up into like the Schwenkfelders and such. So this area just has a very rich early history of immigration. So a lot of them coming here, interacting with the Lenape, and of course, one of the earliest interpreters that was used before we obviously were our own country, but using as an interpreter with the Lenape was Conrad Weiser, of course, was a German immigrant. And so a lot of the Germans were very friendly, generally, with the Lenape. They were willing, and when they came here, they wanted to share a lot of the lands with the Lenape, and then, of course, other backgrounds weren't as friendly. So it was a very, diverse thing going on here in this specific area, at that time, in, like, to say, the late 1600s. And so moving on, of course, to was going to be the early developments of what would become Pennsylvania itself. This is the first map that actually shows Pennsylvania. And of course, this is before Pennsylvania was a state. This is before the United States was a country. And this real early map, if you look at that, you're like, that's not Pennsylvania, Ryan. Like, what the heck is that? This is actually a very map that's showing the early areas of New Jersey, actually as you spell it here, New Jersey. Some of these maps, these early maps, of course, were being done by the Dutch. Okay, so sometimes when you see spellings on these maps, the Dutch are spelling it with a little bit of a touch of the Dutch going on, and so you'll see those misspellings that we refer to as like that. Okay, and this is literally just says part of West. Okay, that's because there was literally nothing. Okay, and then of course Pennsylvania here being referred to as the province of Pennsylvania in America. And so you have Philadelphia here, already on here, of course, that was settled by the Swedes. And then you're going to see here the first three original counties in the state of Pennsylvania: Bucks County, Philadelphia County, and Chester County. And of course, at that time, where we're at currently to this day, this area here was under Philadelphia County. So of course, when you start looking for research and documentation, it can really throw you for a loop. You'll go in there and it'll be Salford Township, and it'll say an ad in a newspaper, for instance, and it'll say Salford Township, and it'll say Philadelphia, right next to it, or skip back, it'll say Skip Back Township, Philadelphia. So that it's really interesting when you dig back into the early time periods, and you have to really kind of pinpoint. But all these little blocks on here, all the really early land tracts. So right here you can see the Welsh tract. The Welsh tract was huge in southeastern Pennsylvania. The Welsh Quakers occupied a very large area of southeastern Pennsylvania, mostly really in that kind of a northern part of Chester County, and then going over into Montgomery County. And that's where you're going to see, when we're talking about place names, that's an easy way to tell. So when you see names like Tredyffrin, Euclid, Gwynedd, all those names like that, those are all Welsh words. Those are all Welsh names. And, but then, of course, you come out here into other parts of Montgomery County, you see, Salford, Tallamencin. Anybody know what Tallamencin is? What language is that? Lenape, right? So, certain areas, you'll see certain areas, especially with the Germans, generally kind of adopting what we refer to really as the proper place names of areas that were named already by the Lenape. So you're going to see a lot of times what the Pennsylvania Germans were doing, where they were saying like, okay, well, this is already referred to the area occupied by Tallamencin, this goes all the way up, with the Pennsylvania Germans up in like Lehigh County and Northampton County. You see some pretty crazy, names up there with like real super long names, and usually if it ends like in a CK, a lot of times, that's usually a Lenape word. So that's an easy way to tell. But they would actually adopt the Lenape names instead of changing the names into English names. And so you're going to see that a lot. And so that's a really cool early map. It kind of really shows you a neat area. And it's, of course, speaking of the Pennsylvania Germans that were coming here, like we said, they came here in 1683. It wasn't too long after 1683 that they started spreading out towards the western areas out of Germantown. Germantown, of course, at that time was not part of the city of Philadelphia. And Germantown, they started spreading out into very much into this areas of Montgomery County. Of course, Skipback was the second area that was occupied by the first German immigrants. And then, of course, we're not that far from that area, right? So they started coming out and buying these very valuable farmlands, right? So creeks all over the place, very fertile farmlands in this area of Montgomery County. And if anybody knew how to farm an area, it was the Germans, right? So they would find an area that they could take down a wooded lot area, use that wood to build structures, and then once the wooded areas, they would then farm that area. Okay, so it was like very planned, very, very German, very organized. And of course, one of the best things of all with obviously the Pennsylvania Germans is the art, right? So, of course, most of you, I'm sure, are very familiar with Pennsylvania German folk art, early Fraktur, and different things like that. This one's actually really neat because this is from 1789, and it's kind of really giving you kind of a neat example of a colonial era look, as you could say, of like a European settler, and which is kind of neat because they did that, of course, on a lot of the Pennsylvania German Fraktors, but a lot of times you're going to see more animals, right, more birds and things like that. But that's why I use this one as kind of a neat. It's just obviously a beautiful piece, and the piece here I think was from. I believe it was from. This was from Bucks County. Okay, so this is a little. We're obviously really very, very close to Chester County in this area, and this pie graph really can relate a lot to this area as well. Back in I guess it was 2017, I worked on a big project with the Chester County Historical Society on a very large exhibit on immigration, it took us 3 years to put together this exhibit because we worked with the county itself to be able to put together a really condensed documentation of immigration based on naturalization papers. Okay, so naturalization papers, of course, only started at a certain period of time. So when you go back into some of that area that we were just talking about, they didn't exist. So you kind of can lose some of that, proper documentation. But this is a really interesting study that was done, and this is through tens of thousands of documents that were done. And so this graph is just cool because it really shows you. So naturalizations by country of origin. Naturalizations started in 1798. This is obviously, now we're obviously a country. We're getting more established as a government, and they had formed ways to naturalize citizens. And of course, those citizens that were here before that, a lot of them they never got naturalized. They were technically still German. Of course, it wasn't even technically Germany at the time. We had different regions, but that's a whole other thing. But Chester County naturalizations from 1798 to 1890, and you can see that the big giant green area here is Ireland. Okay, we had different waves of Irish immigrants that came here to the United States. The early ones that I was talking about generally were all Quaker, Irish Quakers. And then in the 1820s, you started seeing some more Irish immigrants coming because it was kind of the start of the Irish potato famine. Or now, if anybody's really interested in that subject, it is now being referred to a lot as the British genocide. Because really they're finding all this documentation now that has to be released that they were purposely blocking ports of food that were coming into Ireland and purposely trying to starve the people. So it's very interesting. But we, as a country in the United States, were the #1 country that was receiving these Irish immigrants. And that went from loosely late 1830s to the 1850s. And we had thousands upon thousands and thousands of Irish immigrants that came here. And being here close to Philadelphia on the East Coast, they came right into the ports of Philadelphia. There was no such thing as Ellis Island yet, of course. So they were coming directly into city ports, Philadelphia, New York, and Boston generally. And then once they were in Philadelphia, they were like, okay, well, now we need to find work, right? We need to find a place to live and set up our communities. Then they started spreading out. Okay, and so that's a loose explanation of that. Great Britain here, that's going to obviously encompass England, Wales, Scotland, okay, generally mostly Quaker there. This light blue here is Germany. Now remember, 1798. So that was a lot later than those early. You're almost 100 years after the Pennsylvania Germans were here. Okay, so that's a long time. Switzerland, which is really interesting because the Switzerland thing relates into the Pennsylvania Germans, right? So a lot of the Pennsylvania Germans aren't necessarily German. So sometimes they're from Austria, sometimes they're from Switzerland. Perfect example. I work with a guy, and I think you're going to recognize this name obviously very easily. His last name is Landis, right? There's a million of them around here, right? So Landis is an easy way to sometimes figure out where they were from. Landis is either spelled it with an ES or an IS, right? His family was directly from Switzerland. They were not from Germany. Okay, so so the Landises came from like 2 different batches, but of course you remember those borders were so close to each other, and at that time there wasn't huge differences because you also had kingdoms at that time, right? Germany wasn't called Germany. And so just a little interesting little tidbit. Once again, we go back to spellings. Of course, spellings can really tell you a lot. The Netherlands, the Dutch, and of course the Dutch were coming here real early, but there wasn't a ton of them. Okay, so, but does anybody know what river, I'll give you the best hint ever, what river is actually a Dutch word? Schuylkill, right, exactly. Nope, yep. So Schuylkill is actually a Dutch word. When the first immigrants were coming into Philadelphia, the Dutch and the Swedes, and then some of the English that were coming in, it was literally literally a boat race they were actually getting into the Schuylkill River and trying to come up the Schuylkill River as far as they could so they can claim the river, okay? And that's when the Dutch technically won, and they named it Schuylkill, originally spelled Skoookil. Loosely translates into hidden river, right? So because of how windy it was and everything, and you'll see a lot of references to the name Hidden River. That's also loosely based off of, the Lenape used to, you know what the Lenape word is for Schuylkill? What they used to call the river is Manayunk. That was actually the name of the Schuylkill River by the Lenape. Manayunk meant to gather at a place to drink. So that's their water source. So it's interesting. Denmark, Canada, and there's the Swedes in there. Of course, the city of Philadelphia was technically founded by the Swedes. That's why the city of Philadelphia's flag is blue and yellow. Okay, that's why before the Philadelphia Eagles were formed, you had the Frankfurt Yellow Jackets, and they actually specifically picked yellow and blue as their team colors because it is the connection with the city of Philadelphia. Anyway, this kind of shows you another base. This is based off that pie graph. Okay, and this is Chester County. Here you got Montgomery counties right here. Here's Berks, Delaware. These are townships. These are just townships on here, which is pretty much what Chester County is. But this is pretty much just townships here. Here's Schuylkill Township. We're going to talk about Phoenixville a little bit because that's where some of my family's from. But right in that little concentrated area here, that's Phoenixville right here. Okay, here's Tredyffrin. That's a lot of the Welsh. But you'll see that big green in Ireland, right, in Phoenixville. Down here, these are all Irish Quakers. And it can kind of show you like where they went. You know, East Coventry and North Coventry. Just like Salford, all these townships were originally one, right? So East and West Coventry, South Coventry, it was all Coventry Township. Vincent Township, Pikeland Township. It was all the original township tracts that were huge. A little bit later, 1891 to 1960, naturalizations. Big giant orange there, Italy. Okay, you had a large amount of Italian immigrants that came to that area, and for many different reasons. You know, of course, in southern Chester County, you actually had a lot of Italians that came down there because they were experts on quarries, quarrying marble, okay? And they were a lot of the first ones to actually run the mushroom farms in southern Chester County, which is what obviously Kennett Square is very fondly known as and smelled as, right? So, yeah, but a lot of Italians in northern Chester County as well. Anywhere where there was industry along the Schuylkill River, you're going to find immigrants. This blue here is Austria-Hungary. That was Austrian-Hungarian Empire. So that you're talking about the actual countries of Austria, Hungary, and some of the kingdoms and stuff in that area that changed borders like 1,000 times. Poland, which is we're going to talk about a little bit more. Great Britain, Czechoslovakia, Germany, Ireland again, because you had another batch of Irish immigrants that were coming here in the late 1800s. Believe it or not, there's some really interesting ones on here. The slivers get small, right? But Syria, France, the Netherlands, Latvia, Turkey, Yugoslavia, of course, Ukraine, and Switzerland again here at the bottom. Yeah, so just another interesting time period that things obviously drastically change. Here's the other map again, like we were talking about. And once again, you're going to see those batches, right? So what are you going to see? Industry, Coatesville, Phoenixville, Westchester. So these are all areas where they were coming in specifically for work to find jobs. In Phoenixville is fascinating when it comes to the study of immigration. Because you had so many different backgrounds there that came in, and most of them coming at the same time. Generally, Phoenixville was originally settled by Quakers and Mennonites, and the same as here. And then it wasn't until the 1820s when you had a lot of the early Irish immigrants that were coming here. And then later on in the late 1800s, like relates to that map that we showed, you had a lot of them coming here from Eastern Europe, especially Italians, Polish, Hungarian, and Slovak. And there's a really neat etching from a map from 1850. On the map, it shows little, kind of little vignettes around the map. And this little vignette is actually showing what is referred to as the Stone Bridge, which was built by the Reading Railroad. Tunnel Hill, which is, anybody know what Tunnel Hill is? Anybody from that area? I know you know. Tunnel Hill is actually the north side of Phoenixville. So if you're going on 113 North and you're leaving Phoenixville to cross over to Montgomery County, that's Tunnel Hill. It's called Tunnel Hill because that railroad tunnel literally goes under the hill where the houses are. And that's an area, I grew up in Royersford and I grew up in Phoenixville. And growing up in Phoenixville, you could literally hear the train coming underneath it through the tunnel, and it would slightly rumble some of the houses. So it's just a really neat depiction. I love maps and etchings, if you can't tell. This is a really neat photograph. This is in my personal collection. This is 1860s CDV, a carte de visite. That is a photograph, of course, that was taken in studio, in a photography studio in Phoenixville, showing laborers. The word laborer and immigrant go hand in hand, right? So it's actually really hard to find really good original photographs depicting laborers because, number one, they didn't have money to get their photo taken back then, and number two, they were just working all the time. Right? These people worked 17-hour days. It was just nonstop. They went home. They just wanted to see their families and eat food and then go to sleep. Okay? So, but these guys luckily did it, so we can show them and talk about them. But these guys are wearing work equipment. They have tools. They have pipe wrenches. They have small wrenches here. They have hammers. They're wearing work boots and work coverall pants. Which is this is a great photograph. It's one of my favorites that really kind of show you. And these guys are most likely probably Irish at that time period. Like I said, we're talking about the Irish that were coming here in that time period in Phoenixville. It kind of gives you, when they were first coming here, they were the first, generally kind of the first immigrant batch of people that were coming here after the United States was already well established as a country. Okay, so your early immigrants, the Quakers, and the Pennsylvania Germans, they were here almost 100 years before the United States was the United States. Okay, so it was another long period of time there where you had your first true immigrants that were coming here after the United States was established, and it was generally mostly the Irish. And so that was one of the first challenges that we saw in the country when it came to immigrants. Okay, this is when the people that were pretty well established here in the country at that time, a lot of them obviously weren't very fond of the immigrants that were coming here, and it caused a lot of friction in the area. And one of the other things that was very big and different to the country at that time was these people were coming here and they practiced a different religion. Right? They were mostly Roman Catholic. And that was new to the United States generally. So that didn't go over very well. Okay, so there was a lot of different things there politically and religiously that were now kind of conflicting. So a lot of these immigrant groups, starting with the Irish and then later on, a lot of times this is why they would form their own little pockets in communities. And what did they always build their community around? A church. Yep. So always a church. There's always going to be a church. And then they're going to build their community around it, or they build their houses first, raise their money, and physically build the church themselves. Right? And that's what the Irish did in Phoenixville when they built St. Mary's Roman Catholic Church in 1830. It's a very old Catholic church. And it's also very unique architectural-wise, if you've never seen it. Don't ask me how these Irish immigrants knew how to do this, but somehow they based the architecture of this church, based it off of mission churches in the southwestern United States. And so it sticks out like a sore thumb, honestly. It does not relate to architecture for that time period in our area. It's very interesting. And, but anyway, this guy here was actually one of the leaders of the Irish community in that area. His name was Patrick Phillips. He was well educated. He owned a store, and then later on became the postmaster of Phoenixville in the 1850s, and was one of the very first. He was the first person that was Catholic to hold a political position in Chester County, and so it was a big deal for the community. You know, this is his grave. He's buried up on the north side of Phoenixville. I don't know if you can see that picture; it's kind of far away, but there was a crack here, and this thing was broken. And I luckily got to work with an Eagle Scout for his project, and he actually restored that grave. And then through the government, got a new military headstone to add to the front there so everybody could read it. So it's really cool that he did that. And Patrick raised a full company of Irish immigrants to enlist in the Union Army in 1861. And this unit wound up, you know, your Civil War buffs here. He was in the 71st Pennsylvania. Of course, they were in the Philadelphia Brigade. And for those that know, the Philadelphia Brigade pretty much fought in most of the major battles in the East with the Army of the Potomac. Patrick was wounded twice. He was wounded at the Battle of Antietam, and then he was wounded at the Battle of Gettysburg. And then later on was discharged medically and came home back with his wife, and he opened up a restaurant in Phoenixville, and they called it the Antietam House. Just really interesting, cool, you know, tidbits. This here is his, what we refer to, you know, Civil War Corps badge. He was in the 2nd Army Corps. My favorite general during the Civil War was General Winfield Scott Hancock, all right, Montgomery County's finest. So he fought under Hancock, and he was right behind Hancock at the Battle of Gettysburg on Pickett's charge. This is the original silver inscribed Corps badge. Yes, he was Irish. Yes, that looks like a shamrock, but it has absolutely nothing to do with a shamrock. That was just a trefoil. And so that's his Army Corps badge. Luckily, I'm the proud owner of that badge. So there's a whole story behind that. I'll be more than happy to tell anybody after this, but it's a neat piece, and I'd like to share it. So when you talk about German immigrants, there's so many different batches of it, right? So I'm a mix. I'm Irish, I'm German, I'm Polish, and I'm a little Slovak. Okay, but my German family did not come here until the 1920s. You know, so a lot of times, you know, in this area where I grew up, you're surrounded by Pennsylvania Germans, right? Well, it's obviously different than my German family, because my German family was Bavarian. And Bavarians are a different type of German. So, you know, culturally and everything like that, it was a little different. But a lot of those Germans that came here later, you had different batches of Germans, right? So you had there's a lot of Germans that came here in the 1850s. Huge amounts of German immigrants that came here in the 1850s. And believe it or not, there's a bunch of those 1850s Germans that came here that were actually Catholic, German Catholics. So you can sometimes tell that if you go into an area and you find a German Catholic church, usually it's based around that time period. And then later on in the 1920s, you're going to see, you know, German immigrants coming here after World War I, and then after World War II. And so one of the reasons, too, that a lot of them came to this area, especially in Montgomery County and northern Chester County, is because there already was a very well-established German cultural community in this area, something that was somewhat similar, you know, different language, right? Pennsylvania German and High German or proper German are different, very much so, okay? And but they were very similar culturally. Food, of course, everybody's favorite is German food, right? So very similar there, and, like, you know, different things culturally and religiously. So that is a very brief background on that. But this here is actually pretty neat. It actually kind of gives you a neat little tidbit into it. This was my great-great-uncle, who was a German shoemaker who came here to the United States in 1929. And he actually came right to Spring City and brought his business here. But on his business card, he's got all this, pretty good, catchphrases like all work guaranteed, lowest prices. But under here, he put German-American shoemaker. Just the neat little things that, people were very proud of their backgrounds, and they still are today. Just a neat little thing. And then we're going to talk about him here to kind of give you an idea of, we talked about how there was discrimination against Irish immigrants, right? Well, I think that gets overlooked a lot of times is discrimination against Germans, right? So what did we do that I just mentioned, right? World War I and World War II. And both times our main enemy was Germany. That's who we declared war on, okay? So, and this area was so, we just talked about this, right? This area was so rich. This area specifically was so rich in German background that there was backlash on families because of their German descent. And they could speak German. A lot of these families, of course, they continued to speak German. If you grew up in this area, you would go in and you would hear people speaking Pennsylvania German fluently in certain areas, or you have signs that were still in German. Heck, half the roads around here are full-blown German names, right? So you had that huge connection. And there was backlash against that in World War I and in World War II. That kind of put fear into some of the Germans that were here to the point where if they were not naturalized citizens yet, they then were hurrying to do so because they were actually afraid to get deported. And there was a big threat of them being put into camps. And of course, that happened a lot to the Japanese during World War II. But it also happened to the Germans. The Germans that were living here in the United States were put into internment camps. They were afraid that these people were going to be loyal to their fatherland, right? So you had that aspect of it. And then you actually did have the aspect of people being true to the fatherland, right? So you had people, before the United States was involved in World War I in 1917, of course the war was already going on from 1914 to 1917. There was a lot of German citizens that were living here in this area specifically that actually went and enlisted in the German army and fought in World War I in the German army. And that happened as well in World War II. Okay, so it's just a really interesting subject. So this is a photo of the guy that I just showed you his business card of. Okay, this is my great-great-uncle. His name was Joseph Kern, and he came here in 1929. He was also a World War I German machine gunner. He fought in the German army from 1915 to 1918, somehow survived, fighting in most of the major battles on the Western Front. And so this is a picture of him before he came to the United States. And of course, when he came here, it wasn't something that you said, oh, hey, I'm a German, World War I veteran. It was definitely, kept on the down low, right? So we're going to get back to that subject once we get into the 1940s. But at that same time period, you have different backgrounds, right? So you have the World War that's going on, and all these countries are involved, including what we mentioned, Hungarian Empire. This is actually a photo of a Hungarian church that was located in Phoenixville. The congregation still exists today. You had splits, right? Just like, one of the classic things when you do research, right, especially in the 1700s, when you find a Lutheran church, usually right across the street there's a German Reformed church, right? There's a reason for that, and of course some of those two denominations share the same church, and that's referred to as a union church, like the Gashahapen church. So backgrounds, right? So Hungarians, there was a big Reformation in Hungary, and a lot of Hungarians that came here were actually Hungarian Reformed. They were Protestant. And so there was a large population of those Hungarian Protestants that came to Phoenixville. And that church still exists today. This church is gone, but the church that they rebuilt, the stone church, is on the corner of, right next to Reeves Park. Anybody knows Reeves Park is in Phoenixville, where the cannons are. Right on the corner there is Parkside UCC Church, and that's the Hungarian church. And anybody's interested in really good food, Right now, I don't know if the deadline might be coming up here within the next day or so, but they actually do a Hungarian food order. You can pre-order kolbász, which is like almost like a sausage. And so it's cool, you can still get those things. It's hard to find right nowadays. Churches, right? So this is a photograph here. This is a real photo postcard that was taken in 1910 of the Polish church in Phoenixville. The altar in this church is maybe the most beautiful altar I've ever seen, right? So they actually imported the wood from Poland and hand-carved that altar. It is gorgeous, and it's still there today. It is they're very proud of that, and very proud of their background, heritage, right? This here is one of the first priests that was there, and down here, it's very small to read, but I actually have this photo here up here at the table, if anybody wants to come up and look at it later. Down here, it actually talks about who took the photograph, taken in Phoenixville, 1910. It's all in Polish, okay? So you had photographers that would travel around and take, obviously, interior shots of churches. The members of the churches then could purchase these photos, and a lot of times they did that as a fundraiser for churches. But yes, my family that's from Phoenixville were from Poland. My great-great-grandfather came to Phoenixville from Poland in 1903, and when he came here, he was one of the people that literally physically built the church. He would work at the iron company, and then at night he would go and dig the basement to build the foundation for the church. And when you hear these stories of how these people did it, I have no idea how they physically did these things back then, but they were so determined, you know, that they got it done. That's a photo of him right here, and that's a photo of my great-grandfather, his son. I love this photo because it really depicts immigration very well in this image. He's holding a Polish flag. He's holding an American flag, okay? Very cool story. It's actually really ironic that I'm doing this talk today. I got a lot of my interest in immigration and family history from my grandma, and today's actually her birthday. I didn't even realize it until this morning, and I'm doing this talk, and I had all this stuff ready. I'm like, oh, it's her birthday. So, you know, she passed away in 2011, but, you know, this photo was from her. She gave me this photograph. This was her father, and this was her grandfather. And, but one thing that she always talked about, she was born here, born in 1930, to Polish immigrant parents. When she was growing up, she actually did not know how to speak English until she was about 6 years old. And when she had to start going to school. Then the Polish language was out the door, and you got punished if you spoke that foreign language because you were an American. And that's what she was always hammered into her head. And she actually wishes when she got older that she didn't lose that Polish, you know, language, you know, but it was, you know, taken out there so young. But that was one thing that they were very proud of. They were proud of their Polish heritage, but they were also very proud to be Americans, and they were very, very eager to prove why they wanted to live here. And so very proud, obviously, in this photograph here. We talked about some of the other Eastern European backgrounds. You have the Slovak American Club, which it was in Phoenixville. When it comes to backgrounds, you know, not only did you have a church, but a lot of times you had a club, right? Some sort of club that was usually connected with the church, but not all the time. At one point in Phoenixville, you had a Polish club, a Ukrainian club, a Slovak club, Hungarian club, an Italian club, and an Irish club. And of course, nowadays, a lot of that stuff is really going away, unfortunately, right? It's hard to find ethnic clubs. But luckily, Phoenixville still has a very thriving Polish club, which is really cool. And of course, German clubs, right? So there's a plethora of German clubs connecting all kinds of different types of backgrounds of Germans, right? So one of the biggest ones, of course, in our region, and honestly, it's one of the biggest ones in the country, is the Reading Liederkranz. And the Reading Liederkranz, the Liederkranz itself is the actual name of the type of club, right? So you also had different Liederkranzes. You had Lancaster Liederkranz, and you had, them, they were all over the place. But most of them were gone, right? So that's why it's so special to have the one in Reading. And anybody that's ever been to the Oktoberfest there? No? Okay. Well, they do one of the best Oktoberfests in the country. It's actually like literally voted one of the best in the country. German food, endless amounts of German food, and a lot of cultural stuff, and a lot of German music, and it's really, really cool. It's cool just to see the club, because the club itself is from the 1800s. And when you go into the club, you walk through these gates, and the clubhouse is here. It's huge, and there's all these buildings on the property. It literally looks like you're in a German village. It's really cool. I highly recommend checking it out sometime. This is a photograph inside of an Italian club. Oh. It's called the Reading Liederkranz. Yep. This is inside of an Italian club, and they are proudly displaying their kegs of wine. Right? So very Italian to make homemade wine, and just another cool shot. This guy right here I knew. This was my friend Shorty. His parents were Italian immigrants, and Shorty actually fought in World War II in the 82nd Airborne, landed at Omaha Beach on Normandy on June 6th, and so just a fascinating guy that I learned a lot of things from, and and that's a picture of him later on when he worked at the Iron Company. So we talked about industry, right? So like these factories. And not just factories, but farms, right? So you have large farms in this area, and a lot of times these farms would hire immigrant help, right, on the farms. And you'll see all kinds of different types of backgrounds. And I knew a guy, the same guy that I mentioned earlier, his last name's Landis, right? He grew up on a farm pretty much his whole entire life. And his father hired a family that were Spanish back in like the 1940s to actually grow tomatoes for them, and then he actually sold those tomatoes to Campbell's Soup. But anyway, it was a very lucrative business for him at the time, but they would hire help, right? And a lot of these people were coming here looking for jobs, and that's how it was happening, right? And obviously I talked about my grandmother, but this is actually a photograph of her. And it's just a cute photo. I like to show it off. But that's a photograph of her that was taken about 1932, 1933 in Phoenixville. Another background that you had somewhat early-ish compared to other areas in the United States, but you actually had small little pockets and populations of Jewish immigrants that were coming to the area as early as the 1800s. And you had Jewish people that were living in Philadelphia in the 1700s. There's a lot of actually really cool documents that some of the museums have down there from that time period. But anyway, this is actually a photograph of the Jewish synagogue that was in Phoenixville. And it was they actually built, looked like it's a regular house, but you can see a Star of David here in these windows, okay? And then not too long after that, they built a newer building in the 1960s that still exists today. Along with churches and clubs, right, my favorite thing is food, is ethnic food, right? And then all that was based around stores, right? So anybody that grew up in this area, or if you grew up in a more of a rural or more of a city setting within a town, you're going to find a store on every corner, right? But you're going to find markets out here in this area everywhere, right? Farms obviously were able to produce large amounts of things for certain things, but most of them also had little side businesses, right? It's still a thing today, right? Now you drive out to Lancaster County, you can pretty much find anything out there, right? You find a house, someone's making everything from birdhouses to screen doors to some of the best food you can find in the area, right? So same type of aspect, you know, but this is a neat ad from a Polish store that was in Phoenixville that sold meats and groceries. You know, most of that meat is obviously going to be kibasi. So you had all those different, it was neat to be able to live in that time period, of course, and be able to go, even if you weren't Polish, and you wanted to get Polish food, or you wanted to get Hungarian food, or Italian food, or German food, or whatever, you had that option, right, everywhere. And it was so prevalent in our area. When we talked about immigration, and we talk about naturalizations, right, there's a lot that goes into that. And a lot that goes into naturalizations and citizenship and passports. Of course, early times that we were talking about, you're not going to have a lot of these documents. You might be lucky, maybe, if you find some sort of ship record, and then maybe some later naturalizations, you know, especially during the Revolutionary War, when a lot of the German immigrants were, you know, maybe enlisting in the Continental Army. You know, once we became a country, sometimes those promises were granted. Once we became a country and everything, like you could become a United States citizen once we actually were a country. But later on, in some of those later time periods, you know, you're going to be able to find passports, right? So passports are gold when it comes to like doing this kind of stuff. This is actually my great-grandmother's passport from Germany. She came here in 1925 when she was 17 years old. She came here by herself with one suitcase in her hand and came here and came through Ellis Island. That was a story of hers, but a story of many, right? Many immigrants. The bravery that they had, you know, to come to the greatest country in the world. They were determined to do so. And this is a perfect example of it. And you know, you got her passport that's obviously written in German, but this is a little easier to read. You know, she was from a very small little village of Neuenberg, not Nuremberg, but Neuenberg, like the number 9. And then it kind of gives you a little, these passports will really tell you a lot of that great information. The exact date that she came here, you know, the exact date she applied for her passport. That was the other challenge. You can apply for a passport all you want, but you might not get one, right? So, yeah, I remember she had applied for hers, and she had to wait a year until she could actually come here. But, yes, so I have hers and her husband, my great-grandfather's, from Germany. That's another shot of the other page. We see, you know, you see the Reisepass, you know, Deutsche Reich, and stuff like that. You know, a lot of I brought that with me up here too as well. Some of the artifacts that I brought up here. Polish, you know, backgrounds and different German backgrounds. You're still going to see things that were later on. These people were here for long periods of time. Once again, proud of their heritage. This is a guy that was actually from Phoenixville who was Polish American, enlisted in the army during World War II. And unfortunately was killed in action in September of 1944 after crossing the Remagen Bridge, you know, very famous battle in World War II. But when he died, they had his church service in the Polish church, and his entire funeral card is still in Polish. He was born here. He was born here in the United States. But that sort of heritage, of course, you know, continued on. This is an actual certificate of naturalization. Anybody have them from their families? Maybe? No? So anyway, you know, you're going to see these. This is the official document of becoming a United States citizen. And you're going to have all the little descriptions on here: male, white, you know, complexion, you know, eye color brown, hair color brown, 5'6". This gives you a little bit of a description, their address and everything like that. This is my great-grandfather's naturalization record, his paper. We talked about this a little bit earlier, how like there was a scare, right, during different time periods for people to become citizens. This is a perfect example, okay? He came here in 1923. He was here for 20 years before he became a United States citizen, but he became a citizen when? 1943. Right in the heart of the United States involvement in World War II. They had, you know, obviously a fear of being deported or whatever, you know. And so that's why they became United States citizens. He lived in Spring City, in Chester County. This is his English spelling of his name, Joseph Fox. He still signed his name in German, Joseph Fuchs, F-U-C-H-S. So you actually will see that name, and actually there was a lot of Fuchs that were here, Pennsylvania German Fuchs that were here real early, 1730s, that were in like New Hanover Township area. And I'm very determined to find out if I'm also Pennsylvania German, which I'm really hoping that might be the case, but not 100% sure yet. But anyway, that's what that is. That fear of, that being afraid of where you're from, right? And how that's going to affect you. Real hit home to my family, my German family. This is my grandfather. And as you can see, his name is Otto, right? You can't get more German than that. World War II breaks out. He's still in high school at the time. And he was afraid about being teased because of his name being Otto and being 100% German. His parents were from Germany. My great-grandmom had a German accent until the day she died. Okay, in 1999, I was 17 years old, and she still had an accent when she was almost 92 years old. All right, she was in this country for like 70 years, and she still had an accent. She obviously had an accent in the 40s. And they were afraid of that kind of thing. His name was Otto, and he told everybody his name was Joe. Okay, his middle name was Joseph, but he told everybody that his name was actually Joe, and that was because he was afraid of backlash. And his friends and people called him Joe, to the point where when he met my grandmom, that we showed the picture of earlier, and he met her parents, they called him Joe. And her mother, who was from Poland, literally called him Joe for many, many years after the whole Joe thing kind of went away, and I never knew him as that. I just knew him as Papa Otto. But he was still referred to sometimes as that. But that is a really good example of that kind of thing, right? And it's not just the Germans, right? You had different backgrounds that this type of thing affects to this day. Backgrounds are just so interesting. You can sit here and talk about them forever. You can talk about where you're from and different things like that. But when it all comes down to it, we're all from different backgrounds, but we're all the same, right? So, how many people here are not German? I asked that question earlier. Probably a few. Yeah, a couple. But yeah, so you have different backgrounds, right? And everybody has a story, where they were from. But I always like to end my talk with this picture because that's me, right? That's me and my sister with my great-grandmom from Germany. So I consider myself lucky, growing up around all those different backgrounds and getting to be able to learn that different stuff, everything from my German side, but my Polish side and my Irish side. It's all just interesting to me and different, and it makes our country what it is obviously today. But yeah, it's just really cool. And so I took German language in high school, and most high schools now don't offer that anymore. But I took German language in high school so I could talk to her in German. So I learned it very loosely, it was really cool to be able to do that and to have her around as long as I did. But a couple of the things I wanted to point out that I have up on the table, like I said, after I'm done talking, please feel free to come up and look at anything closer. But I did want to, some of the things we showed up here, I didn't talk about a couple of these other things. This is a really neat book. That you will see different companies put out in this time period, the like 19-teens period. It's actually called American Citizenship. And this book was actually published by the Bethlehem Steel Company. Okay? They would actually publish these books and give them to their workers to teach them how to become American citizens. It's really, really interesting. And I've seen this exact same book from different companies in different areas. Sometimes towns would put them out. And it was just a way to kind of help them. and teach them a little thing about American history and American culture and things like that. It's really cool. The other thing that, anybody that grew up in this area probably had something very similar to this hanging in their house at one point. Either it be German or Pennsylvania German, is a house blessing, right? So you're going to see these in all different forms and everything. This is German, meaning God bless this house or God bless this home. This is a neat thing that you'll see around, a lot of times. My parents are sitting here in the front row. My mom still has my great-grandparents' house blessing in Polish still hanging in the house. So you're going to see that, once again, based around religion, of course. This is actually a really cool thing. I could bring up, I like collecting Pennsylvania German stuff, but I brought one thing that you're probably very familiar with. This is a cutout from a coverlet that has the weaver's name on it. Very German, obviously made by Daniel Goodman, and for a woman by the name of Rebecca Dornbach in 1842. Weavers, of course, generally a lot of this weaving experience came here because of the experience in Germany, bringing it here to the United States. One of the very nice luxuries that we got from that. It was, actually. Yeah, I don't know anything about the frame. It doesn't look to be terribly old, but it is not new. This is actually really cool. This is kind of neat thing. This is, there's obviously big efforts, even to this day, and there's actually kind of been a little bit of a resurgence in this of preserving the Pennsylvania German language, right? Now, you could take Pennsylvania German courses at Kutztown, but now there's a lot of smaller churches and different things that have been kind of resurging and taking language classes, because you don't want to lose that, right? It's very special to our area specifically. Or you can just listen to this cassette tape that was made by Ernest Niss and his daughter Karen Edinger, and on how to sing in Pennsylvania Dutch. And this is obviously made probably by themselves, with a little label on it, and it was made in Baumansville. Some random thing that I found at a flea market, but it's really interesting to listen to. It's all in Pennsylvania German, the cassette. And does anybody know what this is? It is a walking stick. Yep, it's a type of walking stick. Oh, he's got one right there. Okay. This is a shillelagh. Okay, shillelaghs are real. You can see when you come up here, if you want to hold it, you can. You can see those little nubs on it, right? Those are thorns, right? Shillelaghs are made from black thorns, and they are nasty. When I got the chance to visit Ireland and stay there for a little bit, and the blackthorn bushes are all over the place, and you do not get near them because you're definitely 100% not getting through them. The thorns are like this big. Shillelaghs are real. Shillelaghs obviously go back thousands of years. They believe that shillelagh itself is an Irish word, and it goes back before Christ. Irish civilizations, of course, go back 4,000 or 5,000 years BC. So a shillelagh was technically a weapon, and they didn't look as timid as this. This is more of a walking stick. They had ones that were legit clubs. They would make the club would be from the root, and they would probably leave the thorns on. Okay, these things were weapons. But this is a shillelagh. It's an old one. It's probably from the 1800s, and this is actually cool because it actually belonged to my great-great-grandfather who came here from Ireland. We think that he brought this to the United States from Ireland, and he would use this in parades in Philadelphia. Pretty neat. And one last thing I wanted to point out when you guys come up, and is a really neat book. I always like to share books. This is a book that's really interesting. It's called Forgotten Soldiers of World War I, and it's called America's Immigrant Doughboys. This book is really fascinating. A friend of mine did this book. I was able to contribute some photos from my personal collection for this book, but it really kind of covers all the backgrounds in that time period and how much of an intricate role the immigrants played in World War I from the United States. Everything from just fighting as regular infantry soldiers to everything from obviously having a lot of German interpreters, most of them coming from Montgomery County, Berks County, because of the German background history. They would be used as interpreters during World War I and World War II. Sometimes they were spies for the American military in Germany. That's a whole subject that's really interesting that if you're interested, look it up. But this book's really cool. It kind of covers a lot of his backgrounds, and it's very interesting if you're interested in immigrants and military history. So I believe that is it for me. Like I said, feel free to come up here and take a closer look at anything or ask any questions. I'll hang out here for a little while. So thanks, everybody, for coming.